What do you do when the son you raised, the boy you dedicated your life to, locks you in a freezer? This was not just a family dispute. This was a chilling act of betrayal by a man so consumed by greed he would do anything to get what he wanted. He thought I was just an old woman, a mere obstacle in his path to millions. But what he didn't know was that while he held the key to my physical confinement, I held a much more powerful one, a key to a legacy of love and secrets he never knew existed. His plot to steal his inheritance would not only be foiled by the one person he underestimated most, but would also reveal a family truth so profound it would change everything. The question isn't whether I'll escape, but what happens when he discovers his entire life is built on a lie and that his past is about to catch up to him in the most unexpected way. The answers are in the very place he thought was a mere storage unit. My hands were raw and red, the skin chapped from the cold water and the constant scrubbing of the kitchen floor. It was a chore I always took on myself, a silent promise to my late husband, Arthur. He'd loved this old house, its worn oak floors, and the way the morning sun hit the pantry just so. It was a house full of memories, a lifetime of them, and I was determined to keep it perfect, a testament to the love we shared. Today, I was scrubbing away a stubborn stain from an old spill, humming a tune from the 1970s. It was a simple, peaceful moment, one of the few I had left, a brief respite from the relentless chill that had settled into my bones ever since Arthur passed. You'd think after 50 years of marriage a woman would be used to the quiet, but the silence was a constant presence, a ghost that sat at the kitchen table with me every morning. A shrill ring cut through the quiet, and I straightened up, wincing as my back protested. It was my son, David. He called at the same time every Friday, a perfunctory check-in that felt more like a chore for him than a genuine conversation. Still, it was a sound that broke the silence, and for that, I was always grateful. I picked up the phone, my heart giving a little flutter of hope, the kind of hope you know is going to be dashed, but you cling to anyway. "Mom, did you get the memo about the weekend?" David's voice was clipped, a little too loud, as if he were already on his way to his next appointment. He didn't wait for my answer. "I'm bringing some things over, just a few boxes. My new place is a little tight on storage." My face fell. "Oh, I was hoping. I thought you might come for dinner. I made your favorite, pot roast." There was a beat of silence, then a strained sigh. "Mom, you know I can't. I've got a golf tournament, and then we're going to the lake house. We've got a busy schedule." "We?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Yeah, my wife Jessica. She's been working so hard she needs a break." And you could hear the condescending tone in his voice, the way he always excused his wife's whims as needs. It was always Jessica wants or Jessica needs, as if she were a delicate flower that couldn't handle the slightest inconvenience, while I was just a sturdy old oak that could weather any storm. He never seemed to realize that I was the one who had spent my life nurturing him, the one who had sacrificed so much for his happiness. But of course he didn't. He was a product of a generation that saw their parents not as people, but as extensions of their own convenience. A free babysitter, a convenient storage unit, a wallet to be opened on demand. I said, "Just leave the boxes in the garage." My voice flat. "Thanks, Mom. You're the best." He hung up and the dial tone buzzed in my ear, a hollow, empty sound. I looked down at my hands, the red skin a stark contrast against the white ceramic of the floor tiles. The hope had fizzled out, and in its place was the familiar ache of disappointment. It was a quiet ache, one that I had learned to live with over the years, a constant companion that reminded me of all the things I'd lost. I went back to scrubbing the floor, the anger building with every stroke. I wasn't just scrubbing away a stain, I was scrubbing away the resentment, the feeling of being used and discarded. But the more I scrubbed, the more the anger festered. I thought about all the sacrifices I had made, all the late nights spent sewing costumes for his school plays, all the weekends spent on the sidelines of his football games, all the money I had poured into his college education. And for what? For a son who saw me like a glorified storage locker? It was a hard pill to swallow, but it was the truth. He had become a stranger, a ghost of the little boy I once knew, the one who would run to me with open arms, a smile on his face and dirt on his knees. I had lost him, and the loss was a constant sharp pain in my heart. The front door creaked open, and David walked in, followed by Jessica, who was draped in a designer coat and carrying a small, perfectly manicured purse. She looked around with a slight wrinkle of her nose, as if the house, which had housed a lifetime of love and laughter, was a little too dated for her refined taste. "Wow, it's so rustic," she said, and the word hung in the air, a thinly veiled insult. "It's not rustic," I snapped, my voice laced with sarcasm I couldn't hide. "It's old. It's a house that has lived a full life, just like its owner." She just gave me a tight smile, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. "Right. Well, David, let's get this done. The car's packed. Let's just dump the stuff in the garage and go." "I've got it, honey," David said, and I watched as he hauled in 2 large boxes filled to the brim with things that I knew would never see the light of day again. He dropped them on the garage floor with a loud thud, not a care in the world for the fragile memories they might contain. He was a man in a hurry, a man with a schedule, a man who had no time for his old, slow mother. The irony of it all was almost laughable. Here he was with his fancy car and his busy schedule, too important to spend a few hours with his own mother. And yet he was still coming to my house for help, still taking advantage of my good nature. My old bones ached, not from the scrubbing, but from the weight of the disappointment. It was a betrayal that went deeper than just a missed dinner. It was a betrayal of a lifetime of love, of a mother's unconditional devotion. But they didn't see it that way. They saw a woman with a house, a garage, and a willingness to do whatever they asked. I was a resource to be exploited, not a person to be cherished. The realization was a bitter one, a truth so sharp it could cut you. I was an old woman who had given everything, and in return I was being given nothing but a few boxes of junk and a condescending smile. I watched them leave, their new shiny car pulling away from the old, worn house. The dust from the road settled around me, a silent metaphor for the way my life had been left behind. I stood there for a long time, the cold seeping into my skin, and for a moment I considered just locking the door and turning the car around and telling them that they could find somewhere else to dump their belongings. But I didn't. I just went back inside, to the quiet, empty house, and to the pot roast that would be going cold on the stove. What was I doing? Was this all I was good for now? A glorified storage unit? I had given up everything for him, my career, my hobbies, my dreams, and now he was treating me like a stranger. But I couldn't give up on him. He was my son. I had to believe that the good boy I raised was still in there somewhere, buried beneath the layers of his new, cold life. But what if he wasn't? What if I had lost him forever? It was a question that haunted me, a quiet whisper in the back of my mind that was getting louder with every passing day.
The silence was deafening after they left. I went to the kitchen and stared at the pot roast, the steam still gently rising, a ghostly wisp in the quiet air. I had made it just the way he liked it, with roasted potatoes and carrots, all bathed in that rich, savory gravy. It was a meal that had taken hours to prepare, a labor of love, and now it was just food. Food that no one would eat. A lump formed in my throat, but I swallowed it down. I wouldn't cry. Crying was a weakness I couldn't afford. Not anymore. Instead, I decided to do what I always did. keep busy. I went into the garage to reorganize the boxes David had left. They were heavy, filled with what felt like a lifetime of junk. I saw old high school yearbooks, a beat-up guitar he'd never learned to play, and a stack of old video games. I picked up one of the yearbooks, running my fingers over the faded cover. There he was, a young, smiling face full of a hope and a joy that had long since been replaced by a hardened, cynical expression. The irony of it all was a punch to the gut. He'd dropped off his past in my garage, but he had no time for his present. He was so busy building his new life that he had no time to look back at the one that had made him. I sighed and set the yearbook back down, a wave of sadness washing over me. I started to stack the boxes more neatly, trying to create order out of the chaos they had left behind. As I moved the last box, my foot hit something hard and metallic on the floor. I bent down, my knees cracking, and picked it up. It was a small, ornate key, glinting under the dim garage light. It looked old, a little tarnished, and I had no idea what it was for. A key to a lockbox? A safe? A secret chest? I turned it over in my hand, a flicker of curiosity momentarily overriding the familiar ache of disappointment. It was a mystery, and a mystery was a welcome distraction. I tucked the key into the pocket of my cardigan, a small, secret treasure. I went back inside, the empty house feeling even emptier now that I had a puzzle to solve. I was a woman of a certain age, and a good mystery was a rare find. It gave me a purpose, a reason to get out of bed in the morning besides the endless list of chores. After dinner, I made myself a cup of tea and settled into my armchair, the same one I'd sat in for 30 years. I pulled out my phone and did something I had never done before. I opened a web browser and typed in how to find a safe in an old house. The results were a mix of conspiracy theories, DIY instructions, and weird videos. I watched a few, captivated by the idea of hidden treasures and secret rooms. I had lived in this house for decades, but I suddenly felt like I didn't know it at all. I was so engrossed in my search that I didn't hear the front door open. "What are you doing, Mom?" David's voice, sharper this time, cut through the quiet. I fumbled with the phone, nearly dropping it. "Nothing. Just reading." He looked at me with a suspicious glare. "Right. Well, listen, I forgot something in the garage. Did you move the boxes? I organized them. They were just dumped there." He ignored my comment and headed to the garage, his footsteps heavy and impatient. I heard a loud thud and then a series of frantic thumps. A moment later, he was back, his face pale, his eyes wide with a frantic panic I had never seen before. "Where is it? Where's the box with the green tape?" he demanded, his voice rising. "I don't know," I said, a lie slipping out of my mouth without a moment's hesitation. "I just stacked them all neatly." He stormed past me, his face a mask of rage, and went back to the garage. I followed him, my mind racing. What was in that box? What was so important that it would make him lose his composure? I stood in the doorway, watching him as he ripped open every box, scattering their contents on the floor. He tore apart the high school yearbooks, threw the video games against the wall, and screamed in frustration. It was an ugly display, a tantrum from a man-child who was used to getting whatever he wanted. "It's not here. It's gone," he yelled, his voice echoing in the small garage. "What's gone, David?" I asked, my voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil inside. "What are you looking for?" "None of your business," he snapped, his eyes flashing with a cold anger. "Did you take anything? Did you see anything?" I stood my ground, my posture straight, my eyes meeting his without a hint of fear. "I didn't take anything. I just moved the boxes. But I did find something." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small, tarnished key. This. It was on the floor. David's eyes went wide, and for a moment I saw a flicker of genuine fear in their depths. He lunged for the key, but I was faster. I pulled my hand away, my fingers closing tightly around the small metal object. "What is this for, David? Is this what's in the box? Something so important that you would scream at your own mother?" He didn't answer. He just stood there, staring at the key, his face a mixture of rage and desperation. I knew in that moment that I had something he wanted, something he needed, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a surge of power, a sense of control over my own life. I was no longer a glorified storage unit. I was a person with a secret, a person with a key, a person who was no longer going to be pushed around. The tension in the air was so thick you could cut it with a knife. David stood there, his face contorted in a silent plea, a silent demand. He wanted the key, and I knew he would do anything to get it. And I knew in that moment that I would do anything to keep it. The game had just begun. What will happen when David realizes his mother is not just a pushover, but holds the key to his future? What will he do to get it back? The key was a small, cold weight in my palm, a physical manifestation of the power I had just stumbled upon. David stood before me, his face a grotesque mask of panic and rage. I had never seen him so unraveled, and I had to admit there was a certain bitter satisfaction in it. For years I had been the one on the receiving end of his thinly veiled insults and condescending indifference. Now the tables had turned. "Give me the key, Mom," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "Don't play games with me." "Games?" I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that was foreign even to my own ears. "You're the one playing games, David, bringing your junk here, demanding dinner on my schedule, acting like I'm a paid servant. This is a house, not a storage unit, and I'm your mother, not your doormat." His eyes narrowed, and I saw a flash of cold fury. "I'm not going to ask you again. Give me the key." He took a step toward me, and I instinctively took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest. He was bigger than me, stronger, and in that moment, he didn't look like my son. He looked like a stranger, a man driven by greed and desperation. "You're not getting this key until you tell me what's in that box," I said, my voice trembling but my resolve firm. I had to know. I had to know what was so important that it could turn my son into a monster. He hesitated, a brief moment of internal conflict playing out on his face. It's just some old business files, nothing for you to worry about." "Business files don't go missing from a simple reorganization," I retorted, a sarcastic lilt to my voice. "And they don't make a man act like a wild animal. Tell me the truth, David, or I'll find out for myself." He let out a frustrated sigh, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. It's the deed to the lake house and a list of my investments. It's confidential, Mom. It's worth a lot of money." A lot of money. The words hung in the air between us, a tangible thing. It wasn't just about a lake house or a list of investments. It was about trust, about respect, about the betrayal that had been festering beneath the surface for so long. He had used me, and now he was trying to intimidate me into giving him what he wanted. "You should have been honest with me from the start," I said, my voice softer now, tinged with a deep, weary sadness. "You could have just asked. You could have just told me. But you didn't. You saw me as a means to an end, a convenient place to hide your secrets." He didn't respond, his silence a silent admission of his guilt. He just stood there, his eyes fixed on the key in my hand, a silent war of wills playing out between a mother and her son. I knew I had to be careful. I had to play this right. I was a woman of a certain age, and a woman who had spent a lifetime taking care of others. But in that moment, I knew I had to take care of myself. I had to fight for what little dignity I had left. The thought of what to do with the key consumed me. I knew it was a bargaining chip, my only leverage against him, but a part of me, the part that had a lifetime of love and trust, wanted to just give it back, to end this ugly scene. But the other part, the part that had been so hurt and so disappointed, wanted to hold on to it, to make him understand what he had done, to make him see me as a person, not a resource. He stood there, silent and still for what felt like an eternity. The tension was palpable, a live wire crackling in the air. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and strained. "What do you want, Mom?" "I want the truth," I said, my voice steady now, "the whole truth. I want to know why you treat me like this, why you see me as less than. I want to know what happened to my son, the boy I raised." He didn't answer. He just stared at me, his face unreadable. I knew in that moment that he couldn't answer. He had become so consumed by his own ambition, his own greed, that he had lost sight of who he was. He was a stranger to me, and I was a stranger to him. We were two ships passing in the night, bound by a shared history, but separated by a sea of secrets and lies. I felt a wave of cold dread wash over me. The key was a small, insignificant thing, but it was a symbol of a deeper, more profound betrayal. He had locked me in a freezer, but not with a key or a bolt. He had locked me away in a place of emotional coldness, a place where he didn't have to deal with the inconvenient truth of my love and my pain. He had cast me aside, and I was no longer going to let him. I was going to find out what was in that safe, and I was going to make him answer for what he had done. I had to be careful. David's desperation was a chilling thing to witness, a side of him I never knew existed. I knew I couldn't back down, not now, but what was in that safe, and what would happen to me when he found out I knew. My heart was pounding, but I knew I had to see this through to the end, no matter what. My heart was a drum against my ribs, each beat a silent protest against the man standing before me. My son, the boy I had cradled, the man I had sacrificed for, now looked at me with a cold, calculating greed. The key in my hand was no longer just a piece of metal. It was a shield, a flimsy but necessary barrier between myself and the stranger who had come to my house. I looked at him, his face a mask of furious desperation. "So you're not just a man with a busy schedule, David. You're a man with a secret, and you're willing to go to any lengths to keep it. This isn't just a list of investments, is it? It's something more, something you don't want me to know." He didn't answer, his silence confirming my suspicions. I knew in that moment that I had to be careful. My little puzzle had turned into a dangerous game, and I was holding the winning hand. The thought sent a jolt of fear through me, but it was quickly replaced by a cold, righteous anger. He had underestimated me. He had thought I was a simple old woman, easily manipulated, easily discarded. But I was my father's daughter, and my father had taught me a thing or two about fighting for what was right. I clutched the key tighter, the sharp edges digging into my palm. "I'm not going to just give this to you, David. I'm going to find out what's in that safe. And when I do, you're going to tell me why you've been treating me like this. You're going to tell me what happened to the kind, loving son I raised." His face twisted in a sneer. "You won't find it. You don't know anything about business, Mom. You're just a housewife." The insult was a familiar one, a tired old jab that had lost its sting years ago. "Maybe so," I said, a slow, knowing smile spreading across my face. "But I know a thing or two about people. And I know when someone is lying to me." He lunged for me, a sudden, desperate movement. I was too old, too slow. He caught my wrist, his fingers digging into my skin, and the key fell from my grasp, clattering to the concrete floor. We both froze, our eyes on the small, unassuming object. In that moment, a car door slammed outside, and we both flinched. Jessica's voice, a shrill, irritated sound, drifted in from the driveway. "David, what's taking you so long? We're going to be late." He cursed under his breath, his eyes darting from me to the key and back again. The panic was back, and it was a powerful thing. He had a choice to make, a choice between his greedy ambition and his carefully constructed facade of a perfect life. I knew what he would choose. He always chose himself.
He gave my wrist one last painful squeeze before letting go. He knelt down, his eyes fixed on the key, but a sudden sound of footsteps on the gravel driveway made him hesitate. He stood up, a flicker of genuine fear in his eyes. He stood up, turning his back on the key, and walked toward the garage door, his steps heavy with a reluctant defeat. He had lost this round, and he knew it. He had a schedule to keep, a reputation to maintain, and a wife who was growing impatient. He was a slave to his own ambition, a man who had traded his soul for a lake house and a golf tournament. He turned to face me, his face a mask of forced calm. "This isn't over, Mom. You'll regret this." "I'm sure I will," I said, my voice steady, my eyes meeting his without a flicker of fear. "But at least I'll know the truth." He didn't say another word. He just turned and walked out of the garage, the heavy door thudding shut behind him. I stood there for a long time, listening to the sound of his car pulling away, the angry squeal of tires on the pavement, a final bitter farewell. I waited until the sound of his car faded into the distance before I moved. I knelt down, my knees cracking and protesting, and picked up the key. It felt heavier now, a physical burden, a key to a door I wasn't sure I wanted to open. I walked back into the house, the silence returning with a vengeance. But this time, it was different. It wasn't the silence of loneliness. It was the silence of a truce, a temporary ceasefire in a war that had just begun. I went to my room, the key clutched in my hand, and sat on the edge of my bed. My mind was a whirl of thoughts, questions, and fears. What was in that safe? Was it just money? Or was it something more? Something that could explain his coldness, his indifference, his betrayal. I knew I had to find out. I had to know, for my own peace of mind, for the memory of the boy he used to be, for the woman I was now, a woman who had been pushed around for too long. I was a woman on a mission, and I wasn't going to stop until I had the answers I deserved. I had to be careful. I was playing a dangerous game, one that could cost me everything. My son was not the boy I had raised. He was a stranger, a man driven by greed and ambition, and he would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. I had to outsmart him, to outmaneuver him, to get to the truth before he did. What I didn't know was that David had already made his next move, and it was a move that I could never have seen coming. I was playing a game of chess, but he was playing with dynamite, and I was about to be blown away. Was I ready for what was coming? I don't know, but I knew I couldn't go back. I had to find that safe, and I had to find it now. The silence in the house was a living, breathing thing. It wrapped around me, a heavy blanket of solitude that had become my constant companion. After David left, the adrenaline that had been coursing through my veins began to fade, leaving me feeling hollowed out and a little shaky. I walked into the kitchen, the sight of the untouched pot roast a fresh jab of pain. I opened the refrigerator and took out a container of leftover chicken salad, a far cry from the elaborate meal I'd planned, but it was all I could stomach. I ate in silence, the fluorescent light of the kitchen buzzing a low, monotonous hum. The key was a weight in my pocket, a constant reminder of the war that was brewing between my son and me. I knew I couldn't keep it there forever. I had to hide it, somewhere safe, somewhere he would never think to look. My mind raced, ticking off possible hiding spots. Under the mattress? Too obvious. In a jewelry box? He knew I had one, and he would tear the house apart looking for it. In the freezer? The irony was too rich, and it was the first place he would check. I had to think like a criminal. Or, more accurately, like a mother who had just found out her son was a criminal. I laughed, a short, bitter sound that echoed in the empty house. I finished my chicken salad and went to the garage, the key still clutched in my hand.
I stared at the mess he had left behind, the chaotic jumble of memories and junk. It was a perfect metaphor for our relationship. He had left me with a mess, and now I was the one who had to clean it up. I started to pick up the yearbooks, the old photographs, the battered guitar. I was in the middle of stacking a pile of old CDs when my eyes fell on a dusty, beat-up toolbox in the corner. Arthur's toolbox. He had bought it 50 years ago, on our first anniversary. He had used it to fix a broken faucet, to build me a garden bench, to hang the picture frames that still hung crooked on the walls. He had been a simple, honest man who had built our life with his own 2 hands, and he had taught me everything I knew. A sudden flash of inspiration hit me. The toolbox was a treasure trove of secrets, a repository of a lifetime of projects. No one would ever think to look in there. I opened it, the metal hinges groaning in protest. It was a jumble of rusty wrenches, frayed wires, and dusty nails. I rummaged through the clutter, a plan forming in my mind. I found a small, empty canister, the kind you would use to store screws. I slipped the key inside, the metal rattling against the plastic. I then buried the canister deep within the clutter, under a pile of old rags and a rusty hammer. It was perfect, a secret hidden in plain sight, a treasure hidden in a pile of junk. He would never think to look in a place that held so many of my memories, so many of my ghosts. With the key safely hidden, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. I had a plan. I was no longer a passive victim. I was a player in this game, and I was going to win. I was going to find out what was in that safe, and I was going to make my son answer for his actions. But I knew I couldn't do it alone. I needed help. I needed someone who knew about safes, about business, about the kind of secrets that men like David kept. I needed a professional, and I knew just the person. An old friend of my late husband, a man who had made a fortune in the private investigation business, a man who was as loyal as he was discreet. I went back inside, a newfound determination in my step. I found his number in my old address book, a yellowed, faded book filled with the names of people who were no longer with us. I dialed the number, my finger trembling slightly. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Just as I was about to hang up, a gruff, weary voice answered. "Hello? It's Frank. It's Martha. Martha Miller," I said, my voice barely a whisper. There was a moment of silence on the other end, and then a slow, tired sigh. "Martha, it's been a long time. I'm sorry about Arthur." "Thank you, Frank," I said, a lump forming in my throat. "I'm calling because I need your help. I have a problem, a big one." "A problem with what?" he asked, his voice laced with a weary curiosity. "A problem with my son," I said, the words a bitter taste in my mouth. He's not the man I thought he was. He has a secret, and I have the key to it, a literal key. I need you to help me find the safe that it opens." He didn't respond right away, and I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. "Martha," he said, his voice softer now, tinged with a note of warning, "you know what kind of business I'm in. This could be dangerous." "I know," I said, my voice firm, "but I have to know. I have to know what kind of man my son has become." He let out a long sigh, and I knew I had him. He was a good man, a man who believed in justice, a man who would never turn his back on a friend. "All right, Martha, I'll help you, but you have to promise me something. You have to be careful. You can't do anything without my say-so. We're going to do this my way." "I promise," I said, a wave of relief washing over me. I was no longer alone.
I had a partner, an ally in this strange and dangerous game. I was a housewife, a widow, a mother, but I was also a woman on a mission, and I was going to see it through to the end. What I didn't know was that David had already made his next move, and it was a move that I never could have seen coming. I was playing a game of chess, but he was playing with dynamite, and I was about to be blown away. Was I ready for what was coming? I don't know, but I knew I couldn't go back. I had to find that safe, and I had to find it now.
Frank arrived at my house 2 days later. He was a man who looked like a character from a noir film. Rumpled trench coat, a fedora, and a world-weary expression that had seen too much of the ugly side of humanity. He carried a battered briefcase and a thermos of coffee, a small comfort in a world of deceit and betrayal. I led him to the kitchen where I had a fresh pot of coffee waiting, along with a plate of my famous oatmeal raisin cookies. He took one, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Arthur always loved these," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Said they were better than anything he could get at the store." "He was a good man," I said, a lump forming in my throat. "Yeah," Frank said, taking a sip of his coffee. "He was. So, what's this about a key and a son with a secret? You know I retired from this business, Martha. I'm too old for this nonsense." "You're never too old to help a friend," I said, my voice firm. I told him everything, about David's condescending attitude, about the boxes he had dumped in my garage, about the key I had found and the frantic rage it had provoked. I told him about the suspicion that had taken root in my heart, the feeling that my son was not who he pretended to be. He listened in silence, his expression unreadable, his eyes fixed on some distant point on the wall. When I was finished, he just sat there for a long time, the silence broken only by the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hall. "What do you want me to do, Martha?" he asked, his voice softer now. "I want you to help me find the safe. I want to know what's in it. I have to know, for my own peace of mind." He sighed, a long, weary sound. "All right, but we have to be smart about this. We can't just go tearing up the walls. We need a plan." He outlined his strategy, a methodical, step-by-step approach that was a stark contrast to my own frantic energy. He would start with the key. He would take it to a locksmith he knew, a man who could tell him what kind of lock it belonged to. He would then use that information to narrow down the possible locations of the safe. He would also do some digging into David's financial history to see if he could find any irregularities. He would look for any large, unexplained deposits, any sudden changes in his lifestyle. He was a professional, and he was going to approach this like a professional. I was just a worried mother, and I was going to follow his lead. I gave him the key, the small, unassuming object that had turned my life upside down. He put it in a small plastic bag and tucked it into his briefcase. He promised me to call me as soon as he had something. He finished his coffee, took another cookie, and left, a ghostly figure disappearing into the afternoon fog. The house felt emptier after he left, but it was a different kind of empty. It was the empty space that a soldier feels after a battle, the quiet lull before the storm. I knew that I had set something in motion that could not be stopped. I was no longer a victim. I was a player in this game, and I was going to see it through to the end, no matter what. I was going to find out what was in that safe. I was going to find out what kind of man my son had become, and I was about to find out just how much he had to lose. I was right to trust Frank. What he found out would change everything, and I was not ready. I thought I was prepared for anything, but nothing could have prepared me for the truth that was about to unravel. My son had not just betrayed me, he had betrayed everyone he had ever known, and I was about to find out exactly how much he had to lose.
The call from Frank came 3 days later, just as I was watering the hydrangeas Arthur had planted. My heart leaped into my throat. I wiped my hands on my apron and answered, my voice a shaky whisper. "Frank, what did you find?" His voice was grave, and I knew in that moment that my worst fears were confirmed. "It's worse than we thought, Martha. The key, it's not a safe deposit box key. It's a key to a vault, a private, high-security vault. And that's not even the half of it."
I leaned against the brick wall of the house, my legs suddenly feeling weak. "What are you saying, Frank?" "I've been digging into David's finances. He's not a successful entrepreneur, Martha. He's a con artist. He's been running a Ponzi scheme. He's been swindling people out of their life savings, promising them a high rate of return on investments that don't exist. The money? It's all gone. He's been using the money to fund his lavish lifestyle, the lake house, the fancy cars, Jessica's designer clothes. It's all a lie." The ground seemed to tilt beneath my feet. My son, a con artist? A man who had built his life on a foundation of lies and deceit? The betrayal was so deep, so profound, that it was almost physical. It was a cold, sharp pain that settled in my heart, a constant ache that would never go away. All those years I had spent raising him, teaching him right from wrong, all those sacrifices I had made, it was all for nothing. He had become a stranger, a monster, a man I didn't even recognize. "The vault," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "What's in the vault, Frank?" "I don't know," he said, his voice laced with a weary sadness. "But I have a feeling it's the last of the money. He's been preparing for a fast exit. He's been liquidating his assets, selling off everything he can. He's been preparing to disappear, to leave everyone he has ever known behind, to leave them all with nothing." "And the key?" I asked, my voice trembling. "He's been so careful with it. He's had it for years, ever since he started his business. He was going to use it to get the last of the money, and then he was going to disappear. But he forgot about one thing. You." A bitter laugh escaped my lips. "I'm just a woman, a housewife, a nobody." "No, Martha," Frank said, his voice firm. "You're his mother. You're the one person he underestimated, the one person he never thought to look for the key with." I hung up the phone, my mind a whirl of thoughts, questions, and fears. My son was not just a stranger, he was a criminal, a man who had stolen from innocent people, a man who was about to disappear, a man who had left me with a broken heart and a shattered illusion. But I had something he wanted. The key. The key to his future. The key to his freedom. The key to his last chance at redemption. And I wasn't going to give it to him. Not yet. I was a woman of a certain age, and I had spent my life taking care of others. But now, I had to take care of myself. I had to do what was right, no matter how much it hurt. I had to stop him. I had to find that safe, and I had to do something about the money. Not for me, but for the people he had wronged, for the people whose lives he had ruined, for the memory of the good man my husband had been, the good man my son had once been. I was going to do what was right. I was going to find that safe, and I was going to see that justice was done. I was right to trust Frank, but what he found out was only the beginning. The truth was far more sinister than I could have ever imagined, and it was about to unravel in a way that I never could have seen coming. My son had not just betrayed me, he had betrayed everyone he had ever known, and I was about to find out exactly how much he had to lose. What will happen when David realizes his mother is not just a pushover, but holds the key to his future? What will he do to get it back?
Frank and I worked tirelessly for the next 2 days, our efforts a meticulous tapestry of investigation and deduction. He was a man of his word, a man of action, and he had a network of contacts that could open doors no one else could. He had the key analyzed by a professional locksmith who confirmed our worst fears. It was a key to a private vault, one that could only be accessed with a special code. The vault was located in a bank in downtown New York, a bank that specialized in offshore accounts and private dealings. A bank that was so discreet, it was practically invisible. But Frank had a contact, an old friend who worked as a security guard, a man who had seen everything and said nothing. He was a ghost in the machine, and he was going to be our ticket in. Our plan was simple, a high-stakes gamble that could either lead to justice or to my own ruin. We would go to the bank, and Frank would use his contact to get us access to the vault. I would use the key to open the door, and we would finally find out what my son had been hiding. The plan was crazy, reckless, and dangerous, but I was a woman on a mission. I was no longer a housewife, a widow, a mother. I was a force of nature, a woman who was going to get justice for the people my son had wronged. The day of the operation, I dressed in my best clothes, a simple navy blue suit that I had bought for Arthur's funeral. I looked in the mirror, and I saw a woman I didn't recognize. She was a woman with a fire in her eyes, a woman who was no longer afraid. I tucked the key into my purse, a small, cold weight that felt like a weapon. I was ready. I was going to do what was right, no matter how much it hurt. I was going to face my son, and I was going to see that justice was done. We took a cab to the bank, a sleek, modern building that looked more like an art gallery than a financial institution. We walked in, and I felt a shiver of fear and excitement. The lobby was a symphony of polished marble and hushed whispers. We met Frank's contact, a man named George, a man with a tired face and kind eyes. He was a man who had seen too much, and he had a silent, weary understanding of the ugliness of human nature. He led us to a back hallway, a secret passage that was hidden from the public eye. We walked past a series of armed guards and closed-circuit cameras. My heart was pounding, a wild drum against my ribs. I was a woman who had spent her life baking cookies and tending to a garden, and now I was breaking into a bank vault. We reached the vault door, a massive steel slab that looked like it belonged on a battleship. George swiped his security card, and the door hissed open, revealing a maze of steel corridors and locked doors. We walked down a long hallway, our footsteps echoing in the silence. We reached the vault, a massive metal cube that was a monument to greed and deceit. George entered a series of codes, and the vault door hissed open. We were in. I walked into the vault, and my breath caught in my throat. The room was filled with row after row of steel lockboxes, each one a monument to a lifetime of secrets. Frank pointed to a small, nondescript box, a box that looked like all the others, but I knew in my heart that it was the one. My hands were trembling as I pulled out the key. I slid the key into the lock, a familiar click, and the lockbox sprang open. My hands were trembling as I opened the lid. And then I saw it. The box was not filled with money. It was filled with a single, battered, leather-bound journal. A journal that was filled with my late husband's handwriting. A journal that was filled with a lifetime of secrets, a lifetime of memories. I picked it up, my hands trembling as I turned the pages. The journal was not a record of a secret life. It was a record of a lifetime of love. It was a record of all the sacrifices he had made for me, for David, for our family. It was a record of his love for me, a love that was so pure and so true that it was almost physical. I looked up at Frank, my eyes filled with tears. It's not money, Frank. It's not a list of investments. It's a journal, my husband's journal. I looked down at the last page of the journal, a page that was filled with my late husband's final thoughts, his final wishes. It was a note addressed to me, to my wife, a note that was filled with a love that was so deep, so profound, that it was almost painful. He had left me everything, all his money, all his investments, all his secrets. He had left me everything, and he had trusted me to do what was right with it. He had left me a legacy of love, a legacy of trust, a legacy of a life well lived. I looked up at Frank, my eyes filled with tears. He didn't leave anything for David, I whispered. He knew that David wasn't the man he pretended to be. He knew that he would squander it. He left everything to me, to his wife, a woman he knew would do what was right. The irony was not lost on me. My son had spent his life chasing after a fortune that didn't exist, a fortune that had been sitting in my house all along. He had been so blind, so consumed by his own greed, that he had never seen the truth. He had never seen the love that had been there all along. He had never seen the woman who had been there for him all along. He had locked me in a freezer, but I was the one who had the key to his future. I was the one who had the key to a legacy of love, and I was going to use it to do what was right, no matter how much it hurt. I had the journal, a roadmap to my husband's true intentions. But my son wasn't going to give up, and he was closing in on me. I knew what I had to do, but I was terrified. Would I be able to outsmart a man who had been playing this game his whole life? Or would my journey for justice end in a way I never saw coming?
The journal in my hands was heavier than its small size would suggest, burdened with the weight of a life's worth of secrets and truths. I held it close, a silent promise to the man who had been my partner, my love, my everything. Arthur had known. He had seen the creeping darkness in our son's heart, the rot that had set in long before I ever saw it. He had known, and he had protected me, even from beyond the grave. I looked at Frank, my eyes filled with a new kind of resolve. He didn't just leave me the money, Frank. He left me a legacy. He left me a chance to do what's right. Frank nodded, his face a mixture of admiration and weary sadness. He was a smart man, Martha. He knew his son. And he knew you. We left the bank, the journal tucked safely in my purse. The air outside was cold, but I didn't feel it. I was filled with a sense of purpose, a fire that had been long dormant, but was now burning bright. I was no longer a victim. I was an avenging angel, a woman who was going to get justice for the people my son had wronged. I was going to find him, and I was going to make him answer for what he had done. I wasn't going to let him get away with it. Not now. Not ever. We drove to my house in silence, the journal a constant presence between us. I knew what I had to do. I had to read the journal, to understand my husband's final wishes, to get a clear picture of the man my son had become. I went to my room, the sanctuary where I had spent so many nights with my husband, the room that was filled with his memories. I sat on the edge of the bed, the journal in my hands, and I began to read. The journal was a window into my husband's soul, a record of his thoughts, his fears, his hopes. He wrote about our life together, about the joy we had found in the simple things, about the love we had for our son. But as the pages went on, the tone changed. It became more somber, more serious. He wrote about his suspicions, about the strange behavior he had noticed in David, the lies, the excuses, the lavish spending that he couldn't explain. He wrote about his research, about the Ponzi scheme that David had been running, about the people he had been swindling. He wrote about his heartbreaking realization, the moment he knew that his son was not the man he had raised, but a stranger, a monster, a criminal. The final pages were the hardest to read. He wrote about his plan, his decision to leave me everything, to leave me with the power to do what was right. He wrote about his love for me, his trust in me, his belief that I would be strong enough to face the truth, to do what he couldn't do. He had given me a weapon, a legacy, and a mission. I was to stop our son from ruining his own life and the lives of so many others. I finished the journal, my eyes filled with tears, my heart filled with a mixture of sadness and resolve. I looked at the man in the photograph on my nightstand, the man who had loved me so fiercely, so unconditionally, the man who had trusted me with his life's work. I was not going to let him down. I was going to do what was right, no matter how much it hurt. I was going to face my son, and I was going to see that justice was done. Suddenly, I heard a loud noise from the garage, the sound of a car door, the sound of a key in the lock. It was David. He had come back. He had come back for the key. I had to act fast. I had to hide the journal, to protect it, to protect the truth. I slipped it under the mattress, a small, unassuming package, a secret hidden in plain sight. I walked out of the room, a woman with a plan, a woman who was no longer afraid. I found him in the garage, his face a mask of furious desperation. He was tearing apart the boxes again, looking for the key, for the one thing he needed to get to the money. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a cold, terrifying rage. "Where is it, Mom? Where is the key?" I just looked at him, my face a mask of calm. "I don't have it, David. I don't know what you're talking about." He didn't believe me. He lunged for me, his fingers digging into my shoulders, his face a grotesque mask of fury. "Don't lie to me, Mom. I know you have it. I know you found it." I didn't answer. I just looked at him, my eyes filled with a weary sadness. I was looking at a stranger, a man who was so consumed by his own greed that he had lost all sense of who he was. He was a monster, a man who had betrayed everyone who had ever loved him. He had locked me in a freezer, but I was the one who had the key to his future.
I was the one who had the key to his salvation. The confrontation was about to escalate, and I had to be ready. David was a desperate man, and a desperate man is a dangerous man. But I had something he didn't, the truth. And I was going to use it to save him, even if he didn't want to be saved. The final chapter is upon us, and the climax is about to be revealed. Will I be able to outsmart my son and bring him to justice? Or will my quest for the truth end in tragedy?
The freezer door was an all too familiar sight, a monument to the cold indifference my son had shown me. He was shouting now, his face a grotesque mask of fury, his hands like vices on my shoulders. "Where is it? Don't lie to me. Where is the key, Mom?" I looked at him, my eyes filled with a weary sadness. I was no longer afraid. I was just tired. Tired of his lies, his greed, his betrayal. "It's gone, David," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "The key is gone, just like the son I raised." The words hit him like a physical blow. He froze, his hands dropping from my shoulders. The anger in his eyes was replaced by a flicker of genuine shock. "What are you talking about?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "I know everything, David," I said, my voice gaining strength. "I know about the Ponzi scheme. I know about the people you swindled. I know about the lies you told, the lives you ruined. It's all in the journal." His eyes went wide, and his face drained of all color. He looked like he had seen a ghost. "The journal? What journal?" I smiled, a slow, sad smile. "The journal you were so desperately looking for, the one your father left me, the one that tells the whole story. The story of a good man who knew his son was a fraud. The story of a man who left everything to his wife because he knew she would do what was right." He staggered back, his face a mask of disbelief. "No, that's not possible. The key was for the vault. The millions, they're in the vault." I shook my head, my eyes filled with a cold, righteous anger. "There are no millions, David. There's just a journal, your father's journal. He knew you would squander it. He knew you would ruin it. He knew you weren't worthy of his legacy." He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mix of rage and desperation. He was a cornered animal, and I knew he was dangerous. He looked around the garage, his eyes darting from me to the old beat-up toolbox in the corner. His face twisted into a sneer. He lunged for the toolbox, his movements frantic and clumsy. He threw the tools on the floor, the metal clattering against the concrete. He tore through the old rags, the rusty hammer. He was searching for the key he believed would solve all his problems. "It's not here, David," I said, my voice calm, my eyes filled with a weary understanding. "It's not in the box. It's in the house. It's where it belongs." He stopped, his hands frozen in midair. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a sudden chilling realization. He knew where the key was. He knew that I had it all along. He had underestimated me. He had seen me as a simple old woman, easily manipulated, easily discarded. He had locked me in a freezer. But I was the one who had the key to his future. I was the one who had the key to his salvation. He stood up, his face a mask of cold, terrifying rage. He was no longer a stranger. He was a monster. He walked toward me, his steps heavy with a dangerous intent. I took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest. I had to be careful. I had to outsmart him. I had to get to the phone. I had to call the police. I had to get help. I had to do what was right. My son was not the man I had raised. He was a man driven by greed and ambition, and he would stop at nothing to get what he wanted.
But I had something he didn't. I had the truth, and I was going to use it to save him, even if he didn't want to be saved.
The air in the garage was thick with tension, a suffocating blanket of unspoken threats. David's eyes, cold and calculating, were fixed on me, the silent accusation in their depths louder than any shout. He knew. He knew that I had the journal, that I had the key, that I had all the answers. The game was over, and I had won. But the victory was a bitter one. I had lost my son, and in his place was a stranger, a man who would do anything to protect his lies. "Where is it, Mom?" he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "Where is the journal? Where is the key?" I just looked at him, my face a mask of calm. I had to be strong. I had to do what was right. "It's not about the journal, David. It's not about the key. It's about you. It's about what you've become." He didn't answer. He just stood there, his eyes filled with the cold, terrifying rage. He lunged for me, a sudden desperate movement. I was too old, too slow. He caught my wrist, his fingers digging into my skin. "Don't play games with me, Mom. I know you have it." A sudden sound from the front door broke the silence. The sound of a key in the lock, the sound of a voice. "David? Martha? Are you home?" It was Frank. He was here. He was here to save me. David froze, his eyes darting from me to the front door. He had a choice to make, a choice between his greed and his freedom. He gave my wrist one last painful squeeze before letting go. He knelt down, his eyes fixed on the key. He had lost this round, and he knew it. He had a reputation to maintain, a life to protect. He was a slave to his own ambition, a man who had traded his soul for a lake house in a golf tournament. He turned to face me, his face a mask of forced calm. "This isn't over, Mom. You'll regret this." "I'm sure I will," I said, my voice steady, my eyes meeting his without a flicker of fear. "But at least I'll know the truth." He didn't say another word. He just turned and walked out of the garage, the heavy door thudding shut behind him. I stood there for a long time, listening to the sound of his car pulling away, the angry squeal of tires on the pavement, a final bitter farewell. I walked back into the house, a woman with a plan, a woman who was no longer afraid. I found Frank in the living room, his face a mask of worry. He took one look at me, and he knew. He knew that I had faced my son, and I had won. He just put his arms around me, a simple human gesture that was more comforting than any words could ever be. I was a woman who had lost her son, but I had found myself. I was a woman who had lost her family, but I had found my strength. I was a woman who had lost her innocence, but I had found my voice. The police arrived an hour later, a team of detectives and financial experts. I told them everything. About the key, about the journal, about the Ponzi scheme, about the people my son had wronged. They listened in silence, their faces grim. They were professionals, and they knew they had a big case on their hands. I had done what was right, and now it was up to them to do the rest. I sat in my armchair, a cup of tea in my hands, a silent witness to the end of a lifetime of secrets and lies. I had a choice to make. I could have kept the money, but I knew I couldn't. It was tainted. It was stolen. It belonged to the people my son had wronged. I was going to use the money to pay back the people he had stolen from. I was going to use the money to do what was right. I was going to use the money to honor my husband's memory, to honor the man he had been, to honor the man my son had once been. I was a woman of a certain age, and I had spent my life taking care of others, and now
I was going to do what was right, no matter how much it hurt. I was going to get justice, not just for myself, but for the people my son had wronged.